Nestle's Empire of Greed. What the rogues didn't tell you introduction. There's a video going around called Nestle is even more evil than you think. It lays out the company's crimes in detail. Child slavery on cocoa plantations in Ivory Coast, aggressive water privatization that leaves communities dry, the baby formula scandal that killed countless infants in the developing world, and a century and a half of relentless corporate predation. The video is good. It is angry in the right ways. It makes you want to never buy a Nestle product again. It has been viewed millions of times, and it deserves every single view. But here's the thing about videos like this. They tell you the crimes of the corporation, but they do not tell you why the corporation exists in the first place. They show you the monster, but they do not explain the system that creates and rewards monsters like Nestle. They make you angry at the company, but they do not tell you that the same logic that drives Nestle to enslave children also drives every other corporation under capitalism. The difference is not that Nestle is uniquely evil. The difference is that Nestle got caught. The difference is that Nestle is big enough and old enough that its crimes are impossible to ignore. But the underlying logic that produces those crimes operates in every boardroom, every quarter, every earnings call, for every publicly traded company on earth. The Rogues video is part of a growing genre of online investigative journalism that holds individual corporations accountable for their crimes. This is a positive development. It represents a hunger for truth that mainstream media does not satisfy. But this genre has a consistent blind spot. It focuses on the crimes of individual capitalists while leaving the category of capitalism itself unexamined. It exposes the wolf, but does not question why the system is designed to feed wolves. This analysis takes the Rogues video seriously, but pushes it further. It accepts the facts about Nestle's crimes, but insists that those facts cannot be understood in isolation. It argues that Nestle is not a bad apple in a good system, but a perfect expression of a system that demands endless growth, endless extraction, and endless exploitation. And it suggests that the real lesson of Nestle is not to boycott a single company, but to understand the system that makes such companies inevitable. Part 1. The scale of the crime. Let us start with what the Rogues video gets right, because it gets a lot right. Nestle is the largest food and beverage company in the world, with revenues of over $90 billion annually. To put that in perspective, $90 billion is more than the GDP of over 100 countries. It is more than the annual budget of most national governments. Nestle owns more than 2,000 brands, from Kit Kat to Nescafé, to Perrier, to Purina, to Gerber, to Maggi. It operates in nearly every country on earth. It employs over 270,000 people. It has been doing this for over 150 years. Nestle grew by buying up competitors, by crushing small farmers, by using its massive scale to drive down prices paid to producers, while keeping prices charged to consumers high. It grew by using the power of the Swiss state to negotiate favorable trade deals, by exploiting colonial supply chains that were built on the extraction of resources from the global south, and by aggressively marketing its products in markets where regulation was weak or non-existent. And throughout that history, it has left a trail of destruction that is staggering in its scope. In Ivory Coast and Ghana, Nestle sources cocoa from plantations that use child labor. Not a few children working after school. Thousands of children, some as young as 5 years old, working 14-hour days with machetes, exposed to dangerous pesticides, never paid a single dollar, never educated, never given a childhood. Many of them were trafficked from neighboring countries like Mali and Burkina Faso. They have never tasted chocolate. They do not know what the beans they are picking are used for. They are slaves. Nestle has known about this for over 20 years. In 2001, they signed the Harkin-Engel Protocol, an international agreement to eliminate the worst forms of child labor from cocoa production. They set a deadline of 2005. They missed it. They set another deadline of 2008. They missed that too. They set deadlines for 2010, then 2015. They have now missed 4 deadlines. And according to a 2020 report from the University of Chicago, there are more children working in cocoa today than there were when the whole thing started. More children, not fewer, after 20 years of promises. Meanwhile, Nestle continues to make billions. In 2023, their profit was over $12 billion. The gap between the suffering that produces their raw materials and the wealth that flows to their shareholders is not an accident. It is not a failure of corporate responsibility. It is the system working exactly as designed. And child labor is not the only crime. There is the water privatization. Nestle has been accused of extracting water from drought-stricken communities in California, Pakistan, Brazil, and India, paying virtually nothing for it, and selling it back at enormous markups as bottled water. In some cases, they have extracted water from public lands under permits that were granted decades ago and never updated, taking water that belongs to the public and turning it into private profit. In California, during the worst drought in 1,000 years, Nestle was pumping water out of the San Bernardino National Forest, while local residents were told to stop watering their gardens. There is the infant formula scandal. In the 1970s, Nestle aggressively marketed infant formula to mothers in the developing world, using saleswomen dressed as nurses to promote the product, claiming it was healthier than breast milk. The problem was that many of these mothers did not have access to clean water to mix the formula. They could not read the instructions printed on the package. They diluted the formula to make it last longer because it was expensive. Their babies starved or died from waterborne diseases. The World Health Organization estimates that this marketing campaign contributed to the deaths of over 1 million infants. Nestle knew this was happening. They did it anyway. There is the Maggi noodle scandal in India, where Nestle was found to be selling noodles with dangerously high levels of lead. There is the forced labor in their seafood supply chain in Thailand, where workers were beaten and locked in factories. There is the systematic union busting across their global operations. There is the price fixing, the tax evasion through complex shell company structures, the environmental destruction of ecosystems around their factories. The list is long. The Rogues video covers much of it. But the question that the video does not adequately address is the most important one. Why does this keep happening? How does a company commit these crimes for over 150 years and still exist? How does it continue to make billions while children die in its supply chain? The answer is not that Nestle has bad management or that they need better ethics training. The answer is that the system does not punish this behavior. It rewards it. Part 2. What the Rogues video misses. The Rogues video presents Nestle as an outlier, a uniquely evil corporation that does things other companies would not do. The title itself says, even more evil than you think, implying that Nestle is in a category of its own. This framing is understandable. It makes the story compelling. It makes you want to take action. But it is also misleading, because it implies that the problem is a single bad company rather than a system that produces bad companies as a matter of course. Let us look at the facts. Nestle's use of child labor in cocoa is not unique to Nestle. Every major chocolate company sources from the same plantations in West Africa. Hershey, Mars, Cadbury, Ferrero Lindt. They all buy from the same supply chains. They all know about the child labor. They have all signed the same protocols and missed the same deadlines. The difference is that Nestle is the largest, so it gets the most attention. But the entire industry is built on the same exploitation. The same is true of water privatization. Nestle is not the only company extracting public water and selling it back. Coca-Cola has been accused of the same thing in India, where communities have gone dry because the company depleted the groundwater. Pepsi has been accused in Mexico. The entire bottled water industry, worth nearly $300 billion globally, is built on the premise of taking a public resource that belongs to everyone, packaging it in plastic, and selling it back at a markup of thousands of percent. Nestle is just the biggest player in this game. The infant formula scandal was not just Nestle either. It was an industry-wide practice that involved every major formula company. The aggressive marketing to vulnerable mothers in the developing world was standard operating procedure. Nestle was the most aggressive, so they were the ones targeted by the global boycott in the 1970s and 1980s. But the practice was industry-wide, and it continues in modified forms to this day. This is the point that needs to be understood. Nestle is not an outlier. Nestle is the market leader in a system where the most profitable companies are the ones that externalize the most costs onto vulnerable people in the environment. The companies that cut the most corners, that exploit the most labor, that extract the most resources without paying for the damage, are rewarded with higher profits, rising stock prices, and bonuses for their executives. The companies that try to play by the rules, that pay fair wages and treat their workers with dignity, are at a competitive disadvantage. They cannot compete with companies that are willing to use slave labor. So when we say Nestle is evil, we are telling the truth about their actions. But we are also missing the deeper truth. Nestle is not evil because it is headed by particularly evil people, although some of them certainly are. Nestle is evil because the system rewards evil behavior. It is not a bug in the system. It is a feature. Part 3. The logic of capital. To understand Nestle, we have to understand the logic that drives every corporation under capitalism. It is a simple logic, but its consequences are devastating and they touch every aspect of human life. A corporation exists to generate profit for its shareholders. That is not one of its goals. In the legal structure of the modern corporation, that is its only goal. Everything else is secondary. Every decision made by every executive is measured against one criterion. Does this increase shareholder value? If it does, it is the right decision. If it does not, it is the wrong decision. Ethics, human rights, environmental protection, worker safety. These things matter only to the extent that they affect profitability. This logic does not care about human life. It does not care about the environment. It does not care about fairness or justice or human dignity. These are not considerations that enter into the calculation. If exploiting child labor is cheaper than paying adults a living wage, the logic of capital demands that you exploit child labor. If dumping toxic waste into a river is cheaper than treating it properly, the logic demands that you dump. If marketing infant formula to poor mothers is profitable, even if it kills their babies, the logic demands that you market. This is not a theory about the greed of individual executives, although greed certainly plays a role. It is about the structural logic of the corporation itself, a legal entity that is required by law to prioritize profit above all else. This is not hyperbole. In the famous case of Dodge versus Ford Motor Company in 1919, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled that Henry Ford could not prioritize worker welfare over shareholder profits. The court said that a business corporation is organized and carried on primarily for the profit of the stockholders. This legal precedent has been reinforced in courtrooms around the world for over a century. This is the actual legal obligation of corporate directors in most jurisdictions around the world. Corporate law requires directors to act in the best interests of shareholders. If a director chooses to prioritize ethics over profits, they can be sued by shareholders for breach of fiduciary duty. The system is designed at a fundamental legal level to produce this behavior. Nestle has been operating under this logic for over 150 years. They have gotten very good at it. They have learned exactly how much they can get away with, exactly where the line of legal enforcement is, and exactly how to stay just on the wrong side of it without triggering consequences that would actually hurt the bottom line. Consider the child labor issue again. Nestle knows about it. They have admitted it publicly many times. They have signed international agreements to stop it. They have set deadlines and missed them, and nothing happens to them as a result. No executive goes to jail. No shareholder demands real change. The stock price does not suffer. The company does not lose market share because the system is not designed to punish this behavior. It is designed to accommodate it, to manage its public relations impact, to make sure it does not become a scandal that affects sales, while continuing the behavior that generates the profits. This is what the Rogues video misses. It shows the crimes with admirable detail and genuine moral outrage, but it does not show the engine that produces them. It makes you angry at Nestle, but it does not make you angry at the system that makes Nestle inevitable. Part 4. The commodification of everything. One of the most revealing aspects of the Nestle story is the water issue. Water is the most basic human need. Every human being needs it to survive. Without water, you die in 3 days. And Nestle's business model involves taking water that belongs to the public, paying virtually nothing for it, and selling it back at enormous profits. This is a perfect example of what happens when capitalism encounters a basic human need. It commodifies it. It turns the most essential element of life into a source of profit. And in doing so, it creates a fundamental conflict between the need of people to survive and the need of capital to grow. In California, during the worst drought in 1,000 years, Nestle was extracting water from the San Bernardino National Forest under a permit that dated back to the 1860s. They were paying about $50 a year for the permit, while selling the water for millions. The water was flowing out of a drought-stricken region in plastic bottles, shipped across the country, while local communities were rationing water and farmers were letting their fields go fallow. The state government eventually ordered Nestle to stop, but it took years of activism and litigation. In Pakistan, Nestle was extracting water from the Punjab region, where the water table was dropping by more than a meter every year because of over-extraction by agriculture and industry. Villages were literally running dry. Wells were going empty, and Nestle was bottling the water and selling it under brand names that suggested purity and health. In Brazil, the same story. In India, the same. In Indonesia, the same. Everywhere Nestle operates, the pattern repeats. The logic of capital says, extract as much as you can, as cheaply as you can, and let the consequences be borne by someone else. The cost of depleted aquifers, dried up wells, and poisoned ecosystems are not on Nestle's balance sheet. They are paid by the communities that Nestle leaves behind. Every time you buy a bottle of water, you are participating in a system that takes a public resource, privatizes it, and sells it back to you at a markup of up to 4,000%. The water itself costs virtually nothing. The plastic bottle costs a few cents. The markup is almost pure profit, based entirely on the fact that water has been successfully commodified, and you have been convinced that bottled water is safer and better than tap water. In many cases, the bottled water is just tap water from another location. Nestle's own internal documents have revealed that much of their bottled water is just municipal tap water that has been filtered and packaged. This is not just about water. It is about the logic that treats the natural world and human beings as resources to be exploited for profit. It is the same logic that drives climate change, that drives growing inequality, that drives the destruction of communities and ecosystems around the world. Nestle is just one particularly visible expression of this logic, but the logic itself is the real problem. Part 5. The myth of consumer power. The Rogues video ends with an implicit call to action. Boycott Nestle. Do not buy their products. Hit them where it hurts. This is the standard response to corporate evil in our society. If a company does something bad, stop buying from them. Let the market punish them. This is the logic of ethical consumerism, and it is the dominant framework for political action in the developed world. This response is not wrong, but it is deeply inadequate. It puts the entire burden on the individual consumer to solve a problem that is structural in nature, and it assumes that the market will actually punish the behavior, which is rarely the case. Consider the numbers. Nestle's annual revenue is over $90 billion. A successful boycott that cost them $1 billion in lost sales is a little more than 1% of their revenue. That is a bad quarter. It is not an existential threat. It is a cost of doing business that they can absorb, pass on to consumers through higher prices, or offset through cost-cutting somewhere else in their vast global operations. The stock might dip for a week. The CEO might issue a statement about how seriously they take the issue, and then things go back to normal. Meanwhile, the conditions that produce child labor in cocoa remain completely unchanged. The plantations are still there, owned by the same families and corporations. The traffickers are still operating across borders, taking children from Mali to Ivory Coast. The governments of Ivory Coast and Ghana are still too corrupt or too weak or too dependent on cocoa revenue to enforce their own laws against child labor. The global price of cocoa is still set by commodity futures markets in London and New York that do not account for the real human cost of production. Nothing about the system has changed at all. Consider the Nestle boycott of the 1970s and 1980s over the infant formula scandal. It was one of the largest consumer boycotts in history, lasting over 7 years and spanning multiple countries. It forced Nestle to change some of its marketing practices, but the company survived. It continued continued to grow. It continued to make massive profits. And the underlying practice of aggressively marketing formula to mothers in the developing world continued in modified forms. The boycott was a genuine achievement of grassroots organizing, but it did not come close to solving the problem. This is not to say that boycotts are completely useless. They can raise awareness. They can put pressure on companies at the margins. They can make a difference in specific cases where the target is small enough and the campaign is focused enough. But they cannot solve the underlying problem because the underlying problem is not a single company's behavior. It is the system that makes that behavior rational and profitable. The real question is not how to punish Nestle for its crimes. The real question is how to create a system where a company like Nestle cannot exist. Where no company can profit from child labor because child labor is illegal and enforced. Where no corporation can extract public water for private profit because water is recognized as a public good. Where the basic needs of human beings are not subordinated to the demands of capital accumulation. That is a much harder question. It requires not just changing what you buy at the supermarket, but changing how society is organized. It requires building political power to regulate corporations effectively, to break up monopolies, to establish public control over essential resources like water and food. It requires moving beyond consumer action to collective action. It requires organizing. Part 6. The bigger picture Nestle is a story about capitalism. It is not a story about a bad company with bad management that can be fixed by better corporate social responsibility. It is a story about what happens when the most fundamental human needs, food, water, nutrition for infants, are turned into sources of profit for shareholders. The Rhodes video shows this, but it does not name it. It shows the children in the cocoa fields, but it does not explain that those children are the logical outcome of a system that values profit over human life. It shows the water being extracted from drought-stricken communities, but it does not explain that the commodification of water is the natural extension of a system that commodifies everything it touches. It shows the babies dying from contaminated formula, but it does not explain that those deaths were not a mistake. They were a predictable result of a system that rewards companies for selling products regardless of the consequences. The Rhodes video mentions that Nestle was originally a baby food company that went on to become synonymous with killing babies. This irony is mentioned in passing, but it is never analyzed. Why does a company that started by trying to help infants end up causing their deaths? The answer is not that the company became corrupt over time. The answer is that the logic of capital accumulation, applied consistently over 150 years, leads inevitably to the point where profits matter more than the lives of babies. It is not a fall from grace. It is the logical destination of the path the company was on from the very beginning. To name the system is to open the door to changing it. That is why so much investigative journalism, even the best investigative journalism, stops short of naming it. That is why the Rhodes video, for all its genuine merits, does not go all the way. Because once you name the system, the solution is no longer a consumer choice that leaves the underlying structure intact. It becomes a political project that threatens the power of the people who own and control the system. The children in Ivory Coast do not need us to buy fair trade chocolate instead of Nestle chocolate. They need us to build a world where chocolate can be produced without slavery. They need the plantations to be owned by the workers who labor on them, not by corporations that have never seen a cocoa pod. They need the global commodity chains that extract wealth from the global south to be replaced by local control of resources and democratic planning of production. They need the power of companies like Nestle to be broken, not just boycotted. That is a bigger task than changing what you buy at the grocery store, but it is the only task that will actually solve the problem. Conclusion: the Rhodes video is a valuable piece of journalism. It exposes specific crimes that deserve to be exposed. It makes people angry at a company that deserves their anger, and it encourages people to take some form of action, which is always better than doing nothing. Every person who watches that video and decides to never buy a Nestle product again has taken a small step in the right direction. But anger at Nestle is not enough. Boycotting Nestle is not enough, because Nestle is not the disease. It is a symptom of a much deeper disease. The disease is a system that gives corporations the structural incentive and the political power to exploit children, to privatize water, to destroy communities, and to profit from human suffering on a massive scale. The real lesson of the Nestle story is not that one company is uniquely evil. It is that the system that produces Nestle is fundamentally broken. And until we fix that system, there will always be another Nestle. There will always be another scandal, another expose, another round of outrage and boycotts that change nothing about the underlying structure. There will always be another group of children working in conditions that would shock us if we allowed ourselves to see them clearly. The children in Ivory Coast are not working in cocoa fields because Nestle is uniquely evil. They are not there because a few bad managers made unethical decisions. They are there because the entire structure of global commodity production is designed to produce cocoa at the lowest possible cost, and the lowest possible cost includes the cost of treating human beings as disposable labor. Nestle did not create this system, although it has certainly profited from it and reinforced it at every opportunity. The system was created by colonialism, maintained by neo-colonial trade relationships, and enforced by the power of multinational corporations over the governments of developing countries. They are working because the system demands that cocoa be produced as cheaply as possible, and the cheapest way to produce cocoa is with slave labor. They will keep working until we change that system. Not what we buy, not which brand we choose, but the underlying structure that makes child labor more profitable than paying adults a living wage. That is the real story that needs to be told. Not about Nestle specifically, but about the economic system that makes Nestle inevitable, and about the world we could build if we had the courage to name that system and the collective will to change it. A world where no child works in a cocoa field, where no corporation owns the water, where no baby dies because a company was allowed to put profits before life.